Araliads, what are they? They're plants in the Araliaceae family, which is, not necessarily a family that people think about a lot, although it's a pretty big family. They're kind of surprisingly related to pittosporums. And a lot of them used to be in the Apiaceae family, which is the umbellifers, like carrots and Queen Anne's lace and things like that. And the flower structure is similar. And they're really all around the world, North America, South America, Australia, Polynesia, all the Pacific Islands, Europe, Australia, Africa, Asia. Mostly what I'm going to talk about today are Asian Araliads. I had to rein myself in because I hate leaving anything out. And then I'm like, okay, this is Araliads I have loved. So I don't have to talk about a lot of the stuff that I don't love. I'm going to start sharing my screen with you now. So it may take me just a second. My love affair with the Aralia group started a long time ago. It's, I like the tropical look. I like some of these big, bold plants. So some I've been growing for a very, very long time. All right, Aralias. This is a complex group. Don't strain your eyes to try and see this. But it is a large group, and this is mostly, this is not the entire family. There's, right now they're saying there's something like maybe 1,600 different Schefflera, most of which haven't been described, and the Schefflera group is probably going to be split up into about 4 or 5 different groups. But it is something that's been worked on, and it's got a lot of uses. So kind of the poster child is the most widely known plant is ginseng. Panax ginseng is the Asian ginseng. We have a Native American ginseng as well. And it's, they're both widely used, especially in Asia. There's a professor I know, Dr. Fu at Hangzhou University. And in the morning, he has a cup of hot water with slices of American ginseng in there. And he drinks that every morning. And at night, he drinks the same thing, but with the Chinese ginseng in there. And he says the American ginseng is very, very hot. Gets your body, gets I don't know, the humors. I have no idea what, but it's hot, and the Asian one is cooling. So you wouldn't want to take the American one at night because it would keep you up all night. But he's given it to me. It didn't do much for me, but people swear by it. Unfortunately, people go out in the wild and dig it up and take it from the wild. For years, I saw some old photos in our database of ginseng production under shade cloth here in North Carolina from back in JC's slides from back in the 80s. I remember the first time I visited the Fletcher Station, Mills River Horticultural Crop Improvement Lab. They were working on Dick Burr, not the politician, the horticulturist professor was working on trying to grow ginseng out there. So it's been going on a lot. The other big one that people know is the true ivies. The heterohelix are the plant that people love to hate. Grows over trees and it grows ground covers and whatnot, is also in the Araliaceae family. I'm not talking about it because I don't love it. So it's been left out, but I did think I should put that there. Another one that you probably hate is hydrocotyle, the little, what's a common name for that? Dollarwort, something like that. Little weed that we get that grows around is probably going to be put back into the Araliaceae soon. So it's got some weedy plants in there. Now, the first time that I really was taken with the Araliaceae, I'd been around some, but hadn't thought about them much. But I went and visited my brother who was going to school at Notre Dame. And I came across this tree that was probably 50 feet tall. And it had these leaves kind of like a sweet gum, but it was obviously not a sweet gum. One, the leaves were larger. They were 8 or 10 inches across. And it had spines on the branches. And it took me a while to figure out what it was, but finally figured out that it was Oreopanax. So, yeah, that was kind of the first time that it kind of opened my eyes that you can get kind of this tropical look, because it looks really out of place in South Bend, Indiana, let me tell you. But it's pretty widespread in China. You know, this is the flowers going a little bit over to starting to become fruit, but you can see it's got these big umbels, which can be pretty showy, and then turns into little black fruit. And that's pretty distinctive. Most of the Araliaceae have these kinds of flowers in these umbel clusters, and then little black fruits, although in some cases they're red or other color fruits. Oreopanax is still a neat tree. It's tough as can be. It gets big. It can get 100 feet tall, and the leaves, if it's really happy, especially down south, can be almost 14 inches wide. So pretty cool. Fall color is not typically great, but it's kind of a neat plant, especially for up north. The next kind of group in the plants that I really, kind of became infatuated with for a while were some of the variegated Aralia. Aralias grow across North America. They grow in Asia, Europe. Aralia elata grows China, Japan, Korea, Russia. So another really cold tolerant one. And, like this Oreo variegatas, it has this nice kind of creamy yellow edge to the leaf. When it first comes out in the spring, it's quite bright. And the old variegata or variegatus, can be really beautiful. This is one up at Longwood. It used to be at the entrance to Longwood. And that's the fruit have already fallen, but those are the fruit stalks that are still on there against that variegated foliage. And somewhere along the line, I think this is really just a renaming of variegatus. Supposedly it's improved, but I don't know. But you've got that white edge to the leaf. It's kind of nice. It's got these big bi to tripinnate leaves. But the big problem with these is they sucker. So if you plant it, in an area like this, maybe you're okay. But if you plant it in a garden where you actually garden and you dig and you move things, it'll start suckering, and it'll sucker plain green. And the plain green ones they'll be out 10 or 12 feet sometimes if you don't get to them. And I can live with some suckering plants, but this is spiny and, it's not worth it to me. There are better plants. So it's a neat plant, but I get by without it. Other people I know, a plant lover I'm good friends with, a great gardener, his was dying and he was desperately trying to find another one. So I pointed him in the direction of one so he could actually get it. Now I mentioned, those are all trees, and for the most part you have trees and shrubs in Aralia, but there are also herbaceous plants. Aralia cordata grows in China and Taiwan, but it's a herbaceous perennial and it's edible. It's called udo, and people will take the young shoots and usually peel off the outside. The outside is kind of it's not a great flavor. But peel that off and then slice up the insides. And sometimes people just do it raw, the pith, the in center of the stems, do it raw and like in salads and things like that. But you can slice it up and do it in, stir fries or whatever. I've had it tempura and I've had it raw, and it's pretty good. The thing about it, if you like edible ornamentals, is you got to have a lot of space. It's a big honking thing. It is, it's about 10 feet at maturity, 8 or 10 feet tall and as wide. So you really got to want that plant because it's going to die completely back to the ground. So you're going to have this 10 foot, 8 to 10 foot wide bare space in the garden. But it's nice because it'll grow in some shade. It'll grow in actually pretty darn shady spots. So, a lot of people who would like to grow some edibles around their house really can't because, they don't have enough sun. But with something like this, you could go into the shade garden with it and have that in there. And it can get some really nice fall color as well. Probably the one that you may have seen that is really taking the gardening world by storm, a lot of people consider it one of the best new plants, is this Aurelia cordata Sun King. So same plant, but with yellow to chartreusey foliage. It's one of those plants you got to figure out where to site it. If you don't get it in the right spot, if you get too much sun and it's too dry, it'll tend to burn. Not enough sun, it'll be lighten up. But if you get it kind of on a woodland edge where it's getting a little bit of light, or under high shade, high pines, that kind of thing, it's really lovely up against some of these darker leaf things in the shade. It does get little umbel white flowers followed by black fruits. It's pretty nice. Another native that I don't have a picture of in here is Aurelia racemosa. That grows through a lot of the Appalachians into Ohio, and I'm not sure if it's entire range. It goes pretty far. It has really showy fruit. It's kind of an ugly plant to me. It spreads, kind of a shrubby plant that spreads, but it almost looks like a blackberry in fruit, which somebody was trying to convince me how great it was and saying, look, it fruits, it looks like a blackberry, it's good for putting in a spot where you want it to just spread. Well, it's got prickles all over it. So I thought, my thinking is, well, if it looks like a blackberry and it's going to spread like a blackberry and it's got prickles and thorns like a blackberry, why wouldn't I grow the blackberry that I can eat rather than the Aurelia racemosa? But, that's me. There's a lot out there and they can be hard to identify. This is one we collected, but I don't think we ever got to germinate in Taiwan. And this is typical, Aralias either have bipinnate leaves or palmately compound leaves in some cases. There are a lot of them out there and some of them are pretty hard to distinguish. Now, on my Araliad journey, one of the next ones I came across, and this is probably because I spent my career in botanic gardens, and this is one of those plants that botanic gardens always seem to have. I don't know why. We've got a really nice one behind the visitor center, Eleutherococcus siboldianus variegata. Used to be, when I first learned it, it was Acanthopanax siboldianus variegata. But it's kind of this sprawling shrub, kind of arching, sprawling branches. It'll root where the branches hit the ground. It'll root and kind of creep along that way. It's it's pretty. It's got these little 5-part leaves with a white edge to them. Really a neat little plant. It's one of those plants that I kind of don't think about anymore. I've grown it for so long, and it's so easy and reliable that it just I don't really think much about it one way or another. But it actually grows well in the shade. When I was putting together this talk and thinking about it, I was like, I got a lot of woodland area that I don't water or take care of, yeah, this might be a good plant to put in there because it is so low care, and that variegation really lightens things up. I'm not going to talk a lot about the Eleutherococcus. They're another one they're mostly spiny plants, and I don't like plants that bite me too much, so I tend to stay away from them. But they can go from shrubs to big trees like this Eleutherococcus lasiogyne, which is from southern China and grow 30 plus feet tall. Has kind of nice little trifoliate leaflets. One that I do like that we grow here is this little kind of low shrub, Eleutherococcus grassostylis. It's just kind of neat and tidy. It's getting ready to flower now. It isn't anything to write home about. Whoops. But it is a good plant, I guess. Now, Tetrapanax papyrifera. This is a plant that the Chinese will tell you is from China, but it's really most likely it's native to Taiwan. Of course, the Chinese will tell you that is China too. Native to Taiwan, but it's been grown in China for so long that it's pretty well naturalized there. I know a lot of people won't go anywhere near this plant. You know, if you look down along the corners and the sides, you'll see suckers there. This does sucker, and some people just won't grow it. And I was like that for a long time. I was like, I don't want those suckers. It's, but I've come back around. I love this plant. It looks so beautiful. And where I came around on it was in Taiwan when I was there, and I would see this. And isn't that great? Just peeking out of that woodland like that. You know, I'd always cut them back every year so they wouldn't get big, but I'm like, you know, let them grow. They don't sucker as much if you let them grow up. Of course, they sometimes get killed by our cold back to the ground, and then they'll start suckering. They have simply huge leaves. I mean, I saw plants with leaves that were 24, 30 inches across, and plants that were, you know, easily 15 feet tall in Taiwan. The pith on this, the inside of the stems, was used for making paper. So sometimes they call it rice paper plant because it makes some really fine paper. I would hate to be the one who has to do that, because the one thing I still don't like about this plant is that it's got a ton of little hairs that come off like dust. And actually, if I ever had gardeners who were having to do a lot of work with it, you know, dig up a bunch of suckers or that kind of thing, cut down a bunch of it, I would always have them wear dust masks, because it really can do a number on your breathing. But you know, if grown right, you know, like this, that's pretty special in that garden, isn't it? Now, if you look carefully at the front edge of that bed in some of those daylilies or whatever the strappy leaf thing is there, you can see some Tetrapanax sucker peeking out. So you do have to do some work if you want it in the garden, but I certainly think it is worthwhile. Used to be able to buy it. You can never find this, it seems, anymore. I know Plant Delights for a while sold one called Steroidal Giant. That was a great big one that didn't sucker, and I think it was just one that was slightly hardier, and so it kept that central stalk like it wants to grow in the wild. The leaves got bigger because it had more oomph to it, but as soon as it got damaged by cold, it started suckering. So, you know, I don't know that it's really is, you know, the key is to just keep it single trunked. But that new growth, look at that, isn't that gorgeous? Oh, love this plant. And when a big plant flowers, you know, that's pretty nice. That first picture was it all in bud, those brown fuzzy buds. And that'll all open to those white flowers. So, I mean, that's pretty worthwhile. Now, my buddy in China, who I'll show you a picture of, saying he does a lot of work with Qinshan Botanic Garden, not to be confused with Shenshan Botanic Garden, but Qinshan outside of Shanghai. And they irradiated some Tetrapanax and got these two mutants out of that. Now, the one with white looks really cool, but that does not look very stable. Can't imagine that will stay stable. But that marginal variegation on the right one, that may be a winner. So I am hoping that it does do well. I'm hoping that when it does sucker, that those suckers will be variegated like that. If not, it'll always have to be propagated by cuttings, and that'll take a long time to make very many cuttings from Tetrapanax, just because they have that cane growth. But every time I see Lou, I say, "Hey, there's Tetrapanax. What's going on with those?" And he says, "Nothing yet." I grew up where it was, well, where I learned plants was cold enough that we did not grow Fatsia japonica. So I didn't really learn that until I moved to Atlanta and got to know it. And I thought it was the coolest plant. Great big palmate, glossy green leaves on the shrub. And, people down there looked at me like I was crazy. They're like, nobody really wants that plant. Nobody wants that plant. But I kept seeing it everywhere. I loved it. And I still love it. But you can never find it for sale. You always, the ways you got it, it seemed like were always either a friend had one and you take a cutting, or you got it from a master gardener sale. There'd be, 2 or 3 that they'd have for sale. And the reason is because it has these stout stems that, if you're going to take a cutting of it, you take off about 1/3 of the plant with one cutting. It's just, you have to take out these huge chunks. And Fatsia japonica flushes and grows 1 time a year. You don't get it to reflush over and over again. So it does 1 flush and growth a year. So for a nurseryman who's actually making a living growing plants, they have a big plant, their mother plant. They can take maybe 4, 5, 8, 10 cuttings. They pot them up, they get them rooted, they pot them up. It makes 1 flush, but it's still too small to sell. So you got to wait until next year. It makes another flush. And nobody really wants 1 stalk of Fatsia. They want a bushy plant. So they have to kind of cut out the top, which they can then stick, and get it to branch out. They got 3 years in there for a plant that they're not going to be able to sell for much money. It just isn't worthwhile for most of them. But they are great plants. They're great in dry shade. They're tough as nails. They'll live. I've seen some at old homesteads in the South that have been there for I don't know how long. This is one that's native to Japan, but it has kind of naturalized into very southern China. I don't think in China they realize how hardy it can be. This form, Sparky, is kind of a really tight one with glossy leaves. It's hard to really depict this plant, but it's one that we got from Dan Hinckley on the West Coast, but it came from one over here on the East Coast somewhere. But that's pretty typical of what Fatsia looks like. Now there's the old variegata, which has kind of irregular white markings on the leaves. Kind of pretty in flower. This is it in flower. It's okay plant. As far as variegated plants go, it's probably not going to make my top 10. But, again, good for brightening up a shady spot. But there are other cool ones. Fatsia japonica spiderweb. Now, this is a neat one. When I first saw this, I kind of flipped out, and I got some plants and, potted them up and fertilized them and watered them and really got them going. And they were all stayed kind of green, and they kept staying green. And it's one of those plants I finally found out that the less fertilizer it gets, the better it does. Too much fertilizer and it goes green. I shouldn't say the better it does. It grows great if you fertilize it a lot, put in really rich soil, but you don't get as much of the white on there. So if you put it in kind of a lean spot, this really shows up. Now remember, I said that Fatsias are slow to propagate. You have these big, chunky cuttings. The very newest growth on a mature plant will be, both your thumbs together. What's great about spiderweb is if you grow it out and it flowers and fruits, you collect seed on it. Every single one of those seeds will look just like this. just absolutely identical. So you can bulk it up pretty quickly, which is a good thing for something like that. So sometimes you can find this a little more commonly. The problem with nurserymen in growing this is even if they get a bunch of seedlings going, they want to get their plants big fast, so they want to fertilize them so they grow big, and then you don't get this character because they've been fertilized and are growing really lushly, and they'll be green, and you have to kind of take their word for it that it is actually spider web, and after you plant it in a year or two, it'll be show this white character. I do have a friend who just says, it looks like mites have been eating it, but there's no account for taste, especially mine. The Japanese have a bunch of cultivars of Fatsia japonica. And if you go over there and see some of these, the variegated ones they have, and fall in love with it, be prepared to open up your wallet, maybe open up a new line of credit. They will be thousands of dollars for them. And usually a nurseryman will have one small plant and it'll be, $6,000. This one, though, is actually in the trade here. This is Murakumo Nishiki. And this has been put into tissue culture. It was considered valuable enough that it made sense to put it in tissue culture to get a lot of these going. Monrovia is selling this as camouflage, I believe, but it's the same plant. Very cool thing. Tony Avent sent some for tissue culture, as well as other people. And he got one back that was obviously tetraploid. It was the leaves were thick, had double the number of chromosomes. And I'm hoping that he's able to grow that out and propagate it and get it out. He's calling it Freaky Nishiki. So if you see that, it'll probably be expensive. Now, I had been growing Fatsia for years, and it wasn't until I came to the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. And in 2008, speaking of Tony, Tony asked me if I wanted to go to Taiwan with him. And I said, yeah, sure. And so, what you do before you go plant collecting anywhere is you start looking through all the floras, all the plant lists and things like that. And I'm going through there and I realize, holy cow, there is a Fatsia in Taiwan. I had no idea. And it's this Fatsia polycarpa. Fatsia polycarpa, not as thick textured as Fatsia japonica. It's got much thinner textured leaves, but you can see how the lobing is much different on Fatsia polycarpa than Fatsia japonica. This is one growing in Tony's garden here in Raleigh. We've got it growing here at the Arboretum. Wasn't until after I'd collected it and brought it back that I realized they'd been growing it for years at Duke, at Sarah P. Duke Gardens and the Asiatic Arboretum. But when we brought it back and started growing it, what we noticed with Fatsia polycarpa is one, that it's not quite as hardy as Fatsia japonica, which we were a little upset about. And in our winters, where a Fatsia japonica won't take any damage at all, we can get tip damage on our Fatsia polycarpa. We've had ours in the lath house die completely back to the ground, but it flushes multiple times in the growing season. So even if it dies back to the ground, it will rebound pretty quickly. And at the end of the season, you'll have a full-size shrub. If you've ever cut back a Fatsia japonica, it could be, you're waiting for years before you have a really decent plant again. So, and look at that new growth on Fatsia polycarpa. Oh, that is just to die for. So I was in England in the fantastic Tregane Garden, T-R-E-G-R-E-H-A-N, which looks like Tregrahan, but is Tregane, down in Cornwall. And I'm going through the garden with Tom Johnson, the owner, and we come across this thing. And I say, what on earth is that? And he says, it's a Fatsia polycarpa, but we're calling it mega Fatsia. The leaves were 3 feet across. It was, the thickness of the leaves was just incredible. They had a bad hailstorm not long before I had been there, and a lot of stuff was tattered, and you could see some holes in the leaves there, but for the most part, they held up. Whereas the leaves on this, I mean, it would have just been shredded in a hailstorm. So I went away and I would show people this picture on my phone. You know, my kids are grown up. They're not cute anymore, so I don't show people pictures of them on my phone. And I'd be like, look at this thing. It's Megafacia. This is amazing. And a few years later, I was going back, and every year at Tregain, they have a big plant sale. And I said, I got in touch. I said, Tom, I'm coming to y'all's plant sale. It's like, all I want, if any way possible, to get that Megafacia you have. And he said, we haven't propagated that. And I asked him for one other plant, which I will show. So I went, and I was happy because he had propagated of the two plants I really wanted. He propagated one. I went down to visit this plant, and it was in fruit. So I went back to Tom and I said, Tom, you got some seed? Can I get some seed? We got seed. So we've been planting this out. We're calling it Shikoku giant form because, this is, Shito giant form, because this big form I'm told comes from Shito in Taiwan, although I didn't see it when I was there. And we've got a bunch of seedlings, and we've been trialing them out. We planted out some small ones. We're growing some bigger. Luckily, we had a mild winter. I'm told it is not very hardy, that this is going to be something that probably won't do for us, but I'm going to try. And we've gotten it out to some people and hope to get it out to more. We'll have some to see at the Arboretum when we are open again, because they didn't all die this winter because it was such a mild winter. But and I've got two at my house that survived the winter, but just barely. So I don't know. So, you know, you keep learning about these new plants. You know, that was only 10 years ago I learned about that, 12 years ago. How long have I been here? 13 years ago. Well, a few weeks ago, we were interviewing for a new plant breeder here at NC State, and somebody was talking about some of their research they had done as a graduate student, and they worked with Fatsia. And they mentioned Fatsia oligocarpella. And I'm like, what? And they were Chinese, and the Chinese have a tendency to split names. They will name a lot of different things that European and Japanese and American taxonomists will lump into bigger groups. And so I said, that's got to be. I know Fatsia. There's no Fatsia oligocarpella. Well, what do you know? I look it up. There is one. I tracked some down. This was just a few weeks ago. I tracked some down, and this morning took this picture of Fatsia oligocarpella cuttings that were sent here. They arrived on Monday and will hopefully root for us quickly, and we'll have some plants. I doubt it's going to have very much hardiness, but you never know. Plants sometimes surprise you, but this is from down near around the islands around Iwo Jima, so probably not going to be hardy, but hey, it's worth a shot. It's always so much fun when you find new plants like that. That was the first thing I did this morning. I came in and went to the greenhouse to visit these because I haven't been in the garden since last week. So very excited. Now, you hear a lot about Taiwan because Taiwan has some great Araliads. And when I looked up, you know, when I was looking at my flora and I saw the Fatsia polycarpa, I also saw Sinopanax. And if you put panax on the name of anything, I start to get excited. You know, Merilopanax and Oplopanax and all these plants. So there's Sinopanax formosanus. I'm going, wow, that is awesome. So we found it, finally found it. And this big plant, looked around, no seedlings anywhere. Looked for, you know, seed. Well, a lot of these Araliads flower in the fall or winter, and the fruit is formed in the spring. Well, most plants fruit in the fall, so we go collect in the fall because you don't, you know, it's not as worthwhile to go in the spring. So a lot of these things we miss because we're collecting at the wrong time. So I never could collect it. I did bring back a plant, but it didn't make it. They grow in these rocky, right on the edge of woods, in these rocky, bare spots, but they root down into the rocks, and man, you tear the roots up trying to get it. So never could get one back. Really only found one or two that I could even try to get back. And they're just this beautiful kind of almost a sycamore-like leaf, real thick, almost like cardboard, with this blue-green top and then this rusty pale brown on the undersides. I just think it is one of the most beautiful plants. And after years of lusting for it, here's another picture from this morning in my garden at home, growing Sinopanax formosanus. Every time we've brought it here to the Arboretum, we've killed it, I think with too much care. So I figured it needed neglect, so I brought it home and put it in my garden where it could get plenty of neglect. And once it gets a little bit bigger, probably by next season, I'll be able to take some cuttings and root them and bring them into the Arboretum. Unfortunately, it's not my collection, but which I would love to have my own collection of it, but I'm just so excited to have it. And it is performing outstanding. Now, a lot of these things are not hardy. And this is one I'm kicking myself for not trying to get, Brassioopsis fatsioides. So it's the fatsia-like Brassioopsis. And the thing with Brassioopsis that makes it different is if you look at this leaf, you know, where a fatsia would have lobes that come in, but there's still kind of a central star in there. And Schefflera, that I'll show later, come in and their leaflets are separate. This comes in like it's separate leaflets, but then gets big again. So each of these whole things is one leaf, but it's got this kind of piece in the middle of it. It's really a fascinating structure that I can't tell what it's for. The only thing that I can think of is where every time I've seen a Brassioopsis in the wild, it's growing in deep, deep shade. And so I'm thinking that maybe it went from a Schefflera-like plant with individual petioles, and it needed to evolve something that would hold those leaflets up more to get more sunlight, so it had a bigger surface area to get sunlight on. But I don't know, but it is a weird thing. And I never collected this because it was always growing at low elevations, and so I never thought about it. But then somebody told me, because this is not going to be hardy, well, because I didn't think it would. Somebody tells me that this other relative, Brassioopsis mitis, first they told me it was hardy to 15 Fahrenheit, and then I've heard other reports that bring it down to almost 0 Fahrenheit. Which, if that's the case, it'd be perfectly hardy for us. So this Brassioopsis mitis, this was another picture from this morning. It will develop those funky leaves. It's just a small plant now. But we have a few of these going from a friend in Europe. So we're pretty excited about this, and we're probably going to try and get some more. I found a great garden in France that has a lot of different Araliaceae, quite a few different Brassioopsis and some other things, who I was hoping to visit this summer, but I think that may be out this year, traveling anywhere. But this one's from Bhutan, so pretty high elevations in Bhutan. Now, I said I loved Panax, and I do. The first of these kind of Araliad panaxes that I really knew was Dendropanax trifidus from Japan and Taiwan. And this kind of a neat plant, evergreen plant, like most of these other ones I've talked about beyond the Aralias and Calopanax. Evergreen. But you see, as a young plant, if you look on the one that's a little bit closer, you can see some tri-lobed leaves. But you can also see some entire leaves without the lobes. And as a young plant, they'll be very lobed and then get less and less lobed as they get older. So ultimately, they lose all that lobing and they become small trees. A neat little plant. You see them used a lot in Japan as evergreen tall trees like at entrances to buildings and things like that, you know, framing it on either side, because they get that kind of nice shape. Usually they'll prune them into more of an upright shape than that round shape. There's the fruit, pretty typical of many of these plants. They'll become black. Some of them, not all, in winters, you can get some winter coloration in there. This isn't really fall color. These are older leaves. They will drop, but you don't get that in all of them, but on the best forms you do. Well, Taiwan, oh, and in Japan, they have some variegated ones. I have seen this. I know where it is. It's at Yamaguchi's rare plant nursery in Japan. When I put this in the slideshow, I thought, oh, I got to go back to Japan, to Yamaguchi's, and see if I can get that. I'm told there is one with a white edge to it. I have never seen it, but I'm told there is one. Really would like to track that down. If anybody has seen it, let me know. But there are a bunch of other ones. This is one Tony and I collected in Taiwan, and Dendropanax pellucidopunctatus is native there. It usually goes into more of a tree, but this one form has stayed like just a low mounded shrub. I imagine ultimately it's going to get, you know, and it's been in the ground for 10 years, probably 8 years, and it's maybe 4 or 5 feet tall and a little bit wider. This really nice light green, which is different from a lot of the broadleaf evergreens we grow, which are, you know, really dark black green. Flowers are not super showy, but it has not been damaged in our cold weather at all, which is great. You know, I keep showing it to nurserymen, hoping someone will take them. I'm like, y'all like green meatballs? Here's an interesting green meatball. Let's go with that. But so far, nobody's taken me up on it. But I'm trying to get it out. It really is a good plant. This one was actually Tony's collection from our trip, so he needs to put a name on it. We've found some other Dendropanax. Haven't necessarily always had luck actually getting them into cultivation. Seed is usually pretty scarce. Sometimes it's hard to actually see them. So we'll find this, like this Dendropanax proteus, but as I mentioned with the Dendropanax trifidus, this does the same thing. When it gets to be mature, it'll just be single leaflets. And so sometimes you don't even realize that you're looking at juvenile and adult forms of the same plant. Same thing with this Dendropanax dentiger, which both of these grow as small trees, just kind of upright and kind of wispy headed from what I've seen them in the wild. There's my friend Lou Gang, the one who nuked the Tetrapanax seed with another unidentified Dendropanax. We don't know what it is, but I sure would like to get some of these into cultivation. We have not had luck yet. One we do have here, and you can sometimes find this for sale, Metapanax. Metapanax davidii is this evergreen shrub or sometimes small tree. Does the same thing as those Dendropanax. This is a younger one, and you can see those, it's got 3 leaflets on a lot of theirs. So it can have 3 to 5 leaflets sometimes as a young plant. That's all new growth at the top. But as it matures, it gets these entire leaves like that. Great little evergreen shade plant. As a young plant, it really provides great texture. I actually, with a lot of these, I start getting disappointed when they get to be mature because the foliage isn't quite as, I don't think they have quite as good a texture. But Metapanax davidii, there is a white-edged form that I saw at Tucker Marsh Plants in England. Mark Fillion, great plantsman and BMW mechanic, had this, and you know, I told him propagate me some. I need to go back and talk to him about that. There's another Metapanax delavei, which is really, if you're going to get one of the two, this is the one to get. You can grow, it grows as a nice shrub. It can grow into a pretty good sized tree. That's probably 18 feet tall right there. But it keeps that really fine texture where the Metapanax Davidii had broad leaflets. The Delavei has these very fine leaflets, and I've never seen this go just to a completely single leaf like Metapanax Davidii sometimes will. Very neat plant. We grow both of these at the Arboretum. They sometimes take some winter damage, but we just cut them back when they do that, and they grow right out of it. Another one in the Arboretum that was kind of a weird one for us. This is a Japanese plant that we collected back in 2012 or 13, 2011. It's a small tree. It's deciduous, has these 3-part leaves. We weren't sure how hardy it was going to be. We collected it pretty low, but it's been out in the garden for 5 years, planted as a small plant. It's really making some good growth now. We're starting to be able to take some cuttings on it. It's real widespread in Japan. It's beautiful, but I've never seen it anywhere in the US before. We're hoping we can get some of them out at least somewhere. All right, now we're going to get to my true loves in the plant world. You know, you love what you can't have, you know, if the plants we can grow easy, you know, sometimes we don't give them enough love and always go after these ones we can't grow. And that's how I am with Schefflera, the hardy Schefflera. Hardy Schefflera in air quotes there. I first heard that there were hardy Schefflera right here at the J.C. Ralston Arboretum. I came for a symposium and Dan Hinckley was speaking. This must have been, I don't know, 2004, 5, 6, something like that. And he was talking about plant collecting in Vietnam. And he says, there are several Vietnamese Schefflera alpina should be plenty hardy for us. Well, it does grow in the Pacific Northwest. Has not proven so wonderful for us. I've tried it multiple times, never had it successfully. We've only put it in the ground once here, and it was stolen its first winter. It was stolen right before a hard freeze, so I'm hoping whoever took it planted it and it died. But this is, I thought it was pretty much just a small shrub, but then I saw a larger one. It can grow quite a bit bigger with time. So you get it, you know, shrub to small tree. And I've killed it at my own house multiple times. Hasn't stopped me from trying. I still buy them whenever I can get my hands on these high elevation Asian Scheffleras. Now, one of the reasons we went to Taiwan was to collect Schefflera taiwaniana, which I think in Taiwan only grows on the central mountain, Alishan, and usually from about 6,000 feet to 9,000 feet plus. So very high elevation. And it can get, you know, 20 feet tall. Beautiful, beautiful plants. They're great in cultivation. They've got those thin leaflets. They're great. Our plant that we planted didn't make it through the summer. These are so high elevation that they won't take our summers. They should be fine during our winters. What we really need to do is try this again plant it in the fall and get it established over the winter and see how it does. We distributed these to a lot of folks. We had a bunch of seedlings. If you still have a Schefflera taiwaniana from one of our distributions, please let me know. Please put it in the chat or send me an email. I would love to get a cutting of it if you still have it. We don't have this anymore. We gave everything away and killed the rest of ours. We may have one in the nursery still. I was visiting Krug Farm Plants in Wales, and Blevin, the owner, hates variegated plants. He hates variegated plants. Can't stand them. And we're walking through his greenhouses, and he's got this pot with this big Schefflera taiwaniana that's got this variegated foliage. And I know he hates variegated plants. I said, Blevin, I'll take that variegated sport off your hands if you want. I'd be happy to take that so you don't have variegated plants anymore. He was not going for it, unfortunately, but I'm hoping he propagates it. I'm hoping it doesn't just die out, because that's what happens with these things. If somebody doesn't take care of it and nurture it, it disappears. But Taiwaniana just not great in our summers. Much better out in the Pacific Northwest. Another one we collected is Schefflera minutistillata. This we collected in southern China on the Nanling Mountains, and it's a kind of a thin textured plant with this really interesting leaf arrangement. It can have about 7 to 15 leaflets, and the leaflets there'll be a whorl of leaflets, and then there'll be another whorl of leaflets on that same leaf coming up above it. So it's almost like two-tiered things of leaflets on there. And we grew from high elevations. And as a plant collector, this is what you always want to see: the plant in fruit. It's so rare to find these Scheffleras in fruit when you're collecting later in the season. The reason I found this in fruit was because I was speaking at a botanical congress in China in the middle of the summer, and when that finished, we zipped up in a train and went up to the nearest mountains, and were able to collect this. This is another one we distributed very widely. I'd love to know if there's anybody listening, if anybody still has this one going as well. We still have a couple of these in the nursery, but we don't have it. We don't have it still going outside. It stayed alive for 3 years though for us outside. So I think if we get the right clone sited correctly, it's at least a 7B plant maybe. And this is, you get that seed and go home, and this is what comes out of it. So we were excited to be able to pass that around. Now I put this as Schefflera gracilis. I'm going to skip over it because that's not gracilis. As I was going back, it's in our database that way, but that's not gracilis. So gracilis has a smaller leaf, but it's much more cold hardy. I mean, it's more cold hardy than the plant. That's actually macrophyllus though. But we did get a plant of Schefflera taiwaniana hybridized with Schefflera gracilis. So it's a perfect intermediate between the two. We had this out in the garden for a while. Even as a young plant, it flowers. That's a real characteristic of this hybrid. I was hoping we would get seed, but we did not, and it didn't last very long for us. I think we may have just had this too moist a spot. Some of these Scheffleras like a lot of moisture. Some like to be a bit drier, and Taiwaniana seems to like it a bit drier. Schefflera multinervia, it grows up to 25 feet tall. This is probably just Schefflera hoy. I don't know that multinervia is really a good species, but they say there's something like 1,000 species of Scheffleras that haven't been named yet, and a lot of them are very, very similar. You get in looking at how long are petioles, how many leaflets, what the flower is like, what the seed is what the fruit is like, what the seed is. It flattened? Does it have grooves? So they're tough for separating out by taxonomists. Schefflera heptaphylla, you may know this. This is one you may have grown as a houseplant, Schefflera octaphylla. We collected this in Taiwan, and where it grows all through Taiwan, China, Japan, Thailand, Vietnam, and you get to be a pretty big tree, like 40 or 50 feet tall. We actually had it, and juvenile, it has this real cut foliage. We actually had it here at the Arboretum, planted out for about 5 years. It survived before going in a really cold winter. So again, that's one, a slightly warmer spot, I think, with the right genetics. The ones that are being grown as a houseplant probably won't survive outside. We're getting back to that big leaf one I showed you. That was Schefflera macrophylla, and those the petioles, the part that holds out where the leaflets are, the leaf stalk on those can get to be 40 inches long. I mean, just these really massive things. And the leaflets can get 18 inches or more long each. So it's this huge tropically looking thing. It grows in southern Yunnan into Vietnam. It's not hardy for us. You know, every time somebody has a new collection of it and I get a plant, I'm like, well, maybe this is from higher elevation. Maybe this is the hardy one. I don't think there's any hope for this one ever being hardy, but yeah, you know. I mentioned this one with Multinervia, Schefflera hoi. This is another one in that Vietnam, China group. Grows 40 feet tall. They say that in Yunnan, this grows up to elevations of 10,000 feet. And I got to figure anything growing at 10,000 feet in Yunnan should be hardy for us. So, but mostly what we get close with leaves is the Schefflera hoi variety Fancypanensis, which is the Vietnam form that grows on Fancypan, the high elevation, the mountain there. And that one just hasn't seemed to be quite as hardy as I think there might be some hoi that gets there. Interesting thing, if we got the Schefflera hoi from 10,000 feet, the question is, would it tolerate our summers? Because there you're getting so high. Rhododendrofolia, a really widespread one. Zhejiang in China, the Zhejiang province, and then Bhutan, India, and Nepal. Another one that grows up to almost 10,000 feet. I've never tried this one, so I'm still waiting to get my hands on it. So the other plant at Tregain that I mentioned that I found that I was really excited about was this plant, Schefflera bodneri. These long, narrow leaflets. Oh my gosh, that is, that looks so good. And when I got there, I got to the plant sale a little bit late, and I came up to the table where Tom Johnson was selling plants. They bring in people from other nurseries to sell plants. Where Tom was selling plants, he was like, thank goodness you're here. I've got this one plant, and he had it behind the table. He said, and everybody is asking for it. And I keep saying it's saved, so glad you showed up. So we have this in the nursery. We'll probably wait and propagate it before we plant it out because it's, you know, hardiness. It's southern China, Vietnam, so I don't know. But we just have one plant, and I came in one day, I was showing a group around, actually our board, we were going out and looking at a few things, and we went into the yurt where we do the children's programs here, and sitting on a table were a few plants from the nursery that they were using for some children's program. And one of them is my one plant of Schefflera bodneri that I made a special trip to England just to bring it back. I was like, oh, let's not use that in our kids' programs anymore. Let's keep that one in the nursery safe. But there are all kinds of new things out there. We keep finding new Scheffleras. This is another Vietnam one. Who knows what it is, but that leaf is much different than anything else that's out there. They're slow to be able to propagate is the toughest thing about them. Schefflera delphei, I mentioned this one because this is the hardiest of the group. We've been growing this for years and years here. It can get up to 25 feet tall. It's you know, I think I have other slides here. Yeah. So you can see it. You can have this cut leaf. This is one in cultivation. That's the kind of a cut leaf form. Trying to since my thing wouldn't play. This is one I collected, we're kind of near the minuta stellata of Schefflera delavea with a much more glossy leaf than typical. We grew that for a long time, and then I think we changed to water. I think we started watering more in the lath house than we had previously for some reason. I'm not sure why. And our plant died that was there. But we have one by our lath house that I brought with me to the Ralston Arboretum from my old the garden I worked at before. And I've been here getting close to, well, I got here in 2007, so it'll be 13 years now. So we've had it for a long time. So the right clones are perfectly hardy and really good plants. So I love that. That's the one that I've had good success with. But I'm going to keep trying them. This Schefflera incisa is very close, and when I first learned it, I thought it was Schefflera delavea, but it's a different thing. And there's a garden in Cornwall, a different garden, Treguy, that has this form of Schefflera incisa. And these petioles are about 30 plus inches long and bright pink. And that's another one of those that if ever I wanted to plant, but it was one stalk straight up, so never could have propagated it. So I'm going to end the Scheffleras right here, getting ready to be done. You know, I appreciate y'all indulging me in talking about Scheffleras. This is another plant from Yunnan, Schefflera fengii, named for the great botanist, Dr. Feng. Grows up to 7,500 feet on these really dry slopes, can get very tall. It's a pretty plant. It's kind of in that same complex with a lot of them that I've not had success with, but this is it growing in my garden, not from this morning. It looks a little beat up after the winter, but it survived one mild winter. So, you know, I'm not pronouncing it hardy yet. But it is growing for me, so I hope it continues to grow. And you know, we've grown other ones here, Schefflera brevipedicillata and Chapana and others. One of these days, we're going to have success with a few more. I'm sure of it. I'll leave it last with one last group that I got to learn in my couple trips to New Zealand. They grow there's a lot of Sinopanax native to New Zealand. And they have variegated ones and all kinds of things like that. But what are really cool are these types, like Sinopanax crassifolius. On the left side is juvenile, and those leaflets will be, on crassifolius, can be 24 inches long and stiff and tough. But over there on the right, you can see a juvenile one kind of down low in the middle. But then the dark-leaved one with the rounded head, that is it at maturity. So they evolved with the moas, the giant birds that used to inhabit New Zealand, and this is was a defense to keep them from eating the plants. And there are a lot of plants that have a similar type of adaptation in New Zealand, where the juvenile becomes completely different on maturity. The other one, Sinopanax ferox. I'm telling you, these leaves are so stiff and so serrated. You could saw oak logs with these things. It's amazing. And they go from pointing downwards. They'll be that, like I showed, and then they'll slowly start pointing upwards, and almost, and then like in another year or two, they'll be like these on the right, where there are no serrations at all, and they're perfectly upright, and they lose all those lower sawtooth leaves and completely change. It's just crazy adaptation. So thank y'all all for letting me talk about one of my favorite groups of plants. You know, I'm asked to give talks all the time, and nobody ever wants a talk like that. So this was indulgent for me to do. So I hope it wasn't too tedious for y'all. I am stopping the Zoom now, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have about Araliads or anything else. Chris, do you have any questions in the chat for me to answer, or does anybody else have questions?
In the chat, someone did add a fun little comment. I think it was Tetrapanax, the paper one. He or she said they planted it around hog lagoons to cover the smell. I thought that was pretty neat.
Really?
Yeah.
Hog lagoons. Man, they must get huge around hog lagoons. I can't even imagine. Any other questions? You can unmute yourself now and ask a question if you like, or you can type it out. I see a question. Well, maybe they were answered. Yeah, kind of. There was a question about does Delavei mean anything? And it's kind of interesting with the two Metapanax, which are sometimes also known as Nothopanax. There's one Delavei, Metapanax Delavei, Schefflera Delavei, who's named for a French missionary, Jean-Marie Delavei, who was a botanist. Didn't collect so many plants as he did more herbarium specimens. But then the other Metapanax Davidii, is named for Père David, another French religious missionary in China, who was also a big a botanist and introduced a lot of plants. First described them. So I like that there's only two species in Metapanax, and they're named for these two French missionary botanists.
Someone just asked what Panax means.
Panax. That's a good question. I probably should have looked that up. I don't know.
I don't know.
My guess is it has something to do with the flower structure. Oh, well, Panax, it might just be the Latin for ginseng, but I don't know. So let me Google that real quick so I don't look so stupid.
And someone else wants to know if Aralia Sun King is edible like the species. I don't know why they'd want it.
I would think so. You got to grow it for a few years until you start getting some bigger stalks. All right, Chris, I'm gonna correct something in the chat. I'm looking through there. Chris said that having that double I at the end usually means it's to honor somebody, and that's not true if it's done correctly. If it ends in that I, like Bodnerii or Davidii, that if it has been used correctly, means that it's named for the person who discovered it. And if it's named in honor of somebody, it's usually like Iana, like Rosa Banksiana. If you know Rosa Banksiana, people think it's named for Joseph Banks, but it's not. It's named for Joseph Banks's wife, which is why it's got the Iana on there. A little bit of botanical Latin trivia, since I couldn't answer the question about Panax.
And Gregory wants to know if you have any thoughts on the Fats heterotypes.
Oh, so Fats hetera I didn't put in there just because I already knew I was going to go long because I run on anyway. I haven't been at work, people. At work, I get to talk about plants. At home, my wife does not let me talk about plants. So Fats hetera is a hybrid between ivy and Fatsia, between hetera and Fatsia. So Fats hetera. And they're little kind of shrubby plants. They can sometimes be difficult to use because they're kind of sprawly things. So I like to plant them often at the base of a tree where they can kind of go up to about 4 or 5 feet along the tree. And as they get older, they'll kind of wrap around it like a skirt. I grow Fats hetera at my house on top of a wall. So in theory, it will cascade over it. It has not wanted to grow in the direction I've wanted it to. So he and I are having a discussion about that. But they're really neat plants, and there's some great variegated ones, Pixie, Angiostar, things like that are really beautiful.
Kathy DeWitt added that Panax means all healing in Greek.
Oh, interesting. So, well, Panax is the Latin name for ginseng, which is used for a lot, but an amazing number of these plants are used for medicinal purposes in China. I didn't talk about that because I'm not terribly knowledgeable about it, but yeah, there's just a ton of them that are used medicinally.
And Lynn added that it has the same origin as Panacea.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
And I forget who it was. I'm going back to it. Looks like Charles was wondering what light conditions do these prefer?
So really, most of these Asian ones that I talked about, certainly all the Fatsia, Dendropanax, Brassioopsis, Metapanax, Gamblia schefflera, can tolerate shade, part sun. None of them really want to be in full sun in our area here, with the exception of the Araliads and Calopanax, the Sinopanax, and the Pseudopanax. Those all want more sun, but the rest of them all part sun.
And that looks like it's the end of the questions, unless there's anything else.
Hey, Chris,
Yep.
could you give that, show that website again that we're going to switch to for next week? This is Noel Licton.
I will be sending that out via cuttings. Oh, Mark has it on, I think, the first slide, don't you, Mark? So I'll send that out via cuttings. That'll be the email that I send out. It'll also be updated to all of the web announcements for future programs shortly.
Okay, great.
There you go. Put it back up for you.
Okay.
Can you redo the program again?
This whole program?
I missed it.
Oh,
Mark is recording it, and I'll get it posted to YouTube soon. I think we've put a schedule out of posting them on Mondays.
Thank you.
Of course.
Mark, thanks for a great talk. It was most interesting. And I